The skewers were still hot, the glaze thick and shiny under the kitchen lights. I slid the last row onto a white porcelain tray, wiped the rim clean with the edge of my apron, and took one breath before walking out. The dining room was full 8 guests, not counting Brent Maris or her fiancé Connor. Maris was perched at the head of the table like she'd always lived here, all satin blouse and curated laughter. Brent leaned back, swirling the last of his Pinot. As I stepped in, the scent of rosemary and grilled lamb filled the room, along with that sharp undertone perfume wine and whatever brittle thing had settled between us lately. I set the tray down carefully between the serving spoons and the half-finished salad bowl. Maris tapped her wine glass with the back of a fork. Light, delicate. I want to say something. The room quieted. Someone laughed softly, expecting a toast. She looked straight at me. For the wedding, the greatest gift would be if you didn't come. A few guests shifted in their seats. She smiled like it was a compliment. You're not really family. You're just the woman who married my dad. No one spoke. Not even Brent. He picked up his glass again, swirled it. Connor's eyes dropped to his plate. The man next to him reached for the breadsticks like nothing happened. I didn't move. My hand was still on the tray. I'd seasoned that lamb myself, cut and marinated it for hours. She'd asked for it. Can you do the lamb again? Connor loves it, in a text that ended with a heart emoji. I glanced at Brent. He didn't even blink. In the silence, the only sound was the click of someone's ring against a glass stem. I turned back toward the kitchen. My feet didn't make a sound against the tile. The air changed in the hallway, cooler, flatter. I walked past the linen closet, past the laundry, into the office. The cabinet on the right still held the deed. My name. Just mine. Through the wall, Maris's voice rose again. She was talking about table runners, blush or ivory. I opened the cabinet drawer and reached behind the folders. The binder was still there, pale gray leather slightly frayed at the corners. I pulled it out and laid it on the desk. I had receipts. 14 years worth. Not because I was petty, but because I paid for things no one ever remembered. I closed the office door softly and sat down. Across the hallway, laughter sparked up again like nothing had happened. But something had, and it wouldn't go back. Not now. Not after this. Not ever. I turned on the desk lamp and started sorting. The last guest left with a murmured, "Thanks again," and a plastic container of leftover salad she hadn't asked for. The front door closed softly behind her, followed by the click of Brent turning the lock. Then silence. I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing stemless wine glasses one by one. The water steamed, but the cold had settled into my wrists. One glass had a smudge of lipstick coral, not mine. Maris's, maybe. I rubbed until the rim squeaked clean. Brent leaned against the counter and watched. He hadn't spoken since the toast. Not in the moment, not after. I dried my hands on the towel looped at my waist. You're really not going to say anything about what happened tonight? He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the countertop. She didn't mean it cruelly. She's just trying to honor her mother. The dish rag dropped from my hand. Honor her by telling me not to come. In my own house. Brent didn't flinch. She's dealing with a lot. It's her wedding. Emotions are high. She called me a stranger. In front of your friends. While eating lamb I made for her. He crossed his arms. You're overreacting. I looked at the man I'd lived with for 14 years and couldn't find a trace of the person who once brought me daffodils when I was too tired to ask. There wasn't even an apology waiting in his eyes, just vague discomfort, like I was making a scene in a library. I rinsed the last glass and placed it upside down on the drying mat. The room smelled faintly of seared rosemary and burned sugar. I left the towel on the stove handle and walked past him, without a word. In the office, the cabinet groaned as I opened it. Still packed with file folders, instruction manuals, and a few expired passports. Behind the tax returns and HOA notices was a slim blue envelope, the deed to the house. Signed before we were married. Bought with my savings. In my name only. I held it flat on the desk. My name was centered, typed clean and plain. No co-owner, no spouse. Just me. The overhead light buzzed faintly. I whispered it without thinking. Honor her how? By erasing me. The next morning, I woke before the sun and opened my laptop. The confirmation email from Rosemark Event Pavilion was still in my inbox. Installment payments, set to auto-deduct every first Monday. I forwarded it with a short note. Please suspend all future payments effective immediately. Client will no longer be covering wedding costs. Next, the insurance portal. I clicked through the bundled auto plan, 2 additional vehicles both under Maris and Connor's names. Coverage added at my request when their premiums had jumped last winter. I removed both with a few clicks. The site prompted a warning: changes will take effect at the start of the next billing cycle. Estimated savings $617 per month. I stared at that number. Not just the money, but the silence that had followed it. The thanks that never came. The assumptions they all made. Brent walked into the kitchen an hour later and found me already dressed, purse over my shoulder. You're up early. I grabbed my keys. So are cancellations. The door closed behind me before he could ask where I was going. I wouldn't give him that. Not anymore. The kitchen table had never looked so bare. I cleared it by hand, moved the candle stacked, the placemats pushed the fruit bowl aside. Only the binder stayed in the center, its pale gray cover soft with age and use. I laid out the receipts in rows. There were hundreds, paper and digital printouts, stapled bills, ticket stubs with curled edges. Each one small, each one forgotten. But together, they told a story no one in that house had the decency to speak aloud. A printout from Maris's last semester at Temple. Balance due to 146. I covered the gap after her mother's old life insurance policy ran out. A copay slip from urgent care when Connor twisted his knee tubing at Lake Tahoe. Brent had asked if I could just cover it this time while he sorted his own deductibles. A handwritten note from Maris at 21. Thank you for the car repair. I know you didn't have to. I'll pay you back when I can. She never did. I placed it between a $478 invoice from the auto shop and the $90 bill from the locksmith after she lost her keys at the beach house. I found the receipt for the venue deposit, $1,800 paid from my account. I printed bank statements, highlighted transfers, wrote dates next to digital entries. I did it with the same calm I used to bring to weekly meal plans and school registrations. Steady, methodical, invisible. On the last page, I inserted a single sheet of paper, in clean black font, centered like a title. This is what I paid while you called me nothing. The binder closed with a soft thud. It was heavier than it looked. At 2:30, I met Angela Ortega, a real estate agent I trusted, at a quiet corner table inside Flint and Field Cafe. She didn't wear her name tag today. That was the point. I'd like to sell quietly. Cash buyers only. She nodded, folding her laptop open. You're not the first woman to whisper that. We didn't need a tour. She already knew the house had visited once last spring when she came for dinner and brought that tiny lemon pie Brent never touched. The market's good, she said, tapping in figures. With that kitchen, you'll get offers within the week. Maybe less. I didn't smile. Let them walk through while I'm gone. I'll leave by Friday. She paused. And after that, a cabin in Medford. 3-month lease. On the lake. Angela tilted her head. You sure you want to be that alone? I sipped my coffee. Not alone. Just not insulted. When I got home, Brent was in the den, half watching a sports recap. He didn't look up. I walked past him with the binder pressed to my chest and a folder of signed documents tucked under my arm. They wanted me invisible. So I made the money invisible first. The sky over Ashland was soft and gray, the kind that made the mountains feel closer, like they were leaning in to listen. I pulled the crates from the back of my truck and set them on the folding table just after 7. By 8, the regulars had found me. Marionberry preserves gone by 11. The last jar went to Mrs. Taggart, who kissed my cheek and called it her reward for showing up early. I gave her an extra set of wooden jam spoons tied with twine, the way my mother used to do. A young couple lingered near the sourdough loaves. I let them sample a piece warm from the thermos basket and watched them melt a little at the taste. They bought 2 jars and thanked me like I was magic. I smiled, tucked the bills in the cash tin, and turned down 3 separate lunch invitations. Not today. By 12:15, the booth was packed, folded, and stored again in the back of the truck. I took one last look at the gravel under my spot stall. 9 third row from the oak trees, and whispered goodbye. I didn't expect to be back. The house was too quiet when I returned. Brent's car wasn't in the drive. I tied my hair back, slipped off my shoes, and stepped into the kitchen barefoot. The floor felt cold, grounding. I opened the pantry and began with the cast iron molds from Vermont, then the flour tins, then the copper pots my mother left me still hanging on the pegboard. I wrapped each one in newspaper and stacked them in a crate labeled kitchen. Eileen, only. By the time I reached the spice drawer, I could hear the garage door rumble. Brent's footsteps were heavy. A pause. Then his voice casual, but louder than usual. Why are the cabinets empty? I didn't turn around. Reclaiming what's mine. He let out a laugh that didn't land. You're being petty. I slid the drawer shut, taped a box closed, and nudged it aside with my foot. The Sharpie label read, Dining Room. Mine before marriage. I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. If I didn't matter to them, they didn't get to keep the parts of me they liked. The morning air felt clipped and clean, the kind of cold that woke your skin before your thoughts. I stood on the porch, coffee untouched in my hand, as the van rolled up the driveway. No branding, just a matte gray panel truck and 2 men in flannel jackets stepping out with clipboards. We didn't make small talk. While they prepped the camera equipment to stage the house, I moved methodically through the bedroom. My side of the closet had always been the smaller one. It didn't take long. Blouses I wore to Maris's recitals. The coat I loaned her when she caught strep in 11th grade. I folded each item with a precision I hadn't used in years and slid them into the garment bags. Downstairs, I heard one of the movers tap the hardwood to test creaks before setting a tripod. I packed my jewelry case, double-checked the safe, and paused before pulling a small envelope from the desk drawer. The insurance cancellation notice. Auto policy. Maris and Connor's names had already been scrubbed. Brent came home around noon. I heard the door open, then the weight of his steps as he hovered near the hallway, watching the dining room get disassembled. The cherry wood table, the glass front hutch, all of it wrapped in blankets, taped and labeled storage. Eileen only. He trailed me as I carried my overnight bag out to the car. You're not even going to talk to her. The tailgate clicked shut. She didn't mean it like that. I turned to him, binder in hand. The one with 14 years of receipts, braces, textbook, ski gear, that one trip to Mendocino when she wanted to see the seals. She meant every word. You just didn't stop her. I left it on the kitchen counter beside the house key and the envelope with the venue cancellation confirmation. The binder was slightly askew. I didn't fix it. The last thing I touched was the light switch by the mudroom. Click. The door locked behind me with a soft, final sound. 2 hours later, I was pulling into the gravel driveway of the Medford cabin. Pine needles scattered like gold threads across the porch. The air smelled like wood smoke and damp earth. I carried the binder inside and set it on the counter, spine up. The call came just after 8 the next morning. The cabin was still gray with mist, and the kettle on the stove hadn't even begun to hiss. I let the phone vibrate itself still. 5 minutes later, it rang again. Then again. Brent never had the patience for silence. Outside, a pair of Canada geese drifted slow across the lake's edge, their bodies gliding like commas on the water. I poured the water over lemon balm and honeybush leaves, stirred once, and carried the mug to the porch. The phone lit up again, voicemail this time. I let the steam curl around my face and listened. Venue canceled. They need a new card? I told them it was a mistake, that you'd fix it. The florist won't refund the deposit. The caterer said something about final payments already received. What's going on, Eileen? A pause. Then a sigh that had more edge than confusion. You could have at least told me before pulling the rug out. Do you want her to hate you forever? I tapped the screen, deleted the message. The next one came from Maris. Short. No punctuation. No warmth. This is childish and cruel. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a new recipe journal on the porch table. Blank linen cover, smooth, heavyweight pages. I'd brought it from the farmer's market on a whim last spring and never used it. The ink of the pen felt grounding in my hand. I wrote the first title slowly, Cardamom Pear Preserves, Lower Sugar Batch. A scrub jay landed on the railing. I kept writing. By noon, the cabin smelled like toasted oats and baked apple slices. I kept my phone on silent, turning it over only once to see 3 missed calls, all from Brent. In Ashland, I imagined the picture unraveling. The vineyard manager handing back a voided contract, the florist pocketing the non-refundable deposit and deleting the order file. The caterer explaining they'd already purchased ingredients for a guest list that had changed, then disappeared. Maris would pivot. Of course she would. Connor's parents had a large backyard and a decent grill. I imagined her pretending it was always meant to be a casual garden wedding, while her lips pressed tighter than her smile could stretch. Brent would swipe the credit card. Again and again, and again. I turned the page in the journal and wrote a new heading. Roasted sweet corn relish, no vinegar. The hydrangeas in the side yard were taller than I remembered, though half wilted from heat. I parked at the end of the street and walked the rest of the way, carrying nothing but a canvas bag and the spare key Brady used when he watered plants for us during vacations. He met me by the gate with a shrug, an earbud still hanging from his collar. Garage doors jammed. Dad says it's the fuse, but I think it's the wiring. I thanked him with a nod and slipped through the side door. Inside, the air was stale, warm. Dust hung unmoved in the light from the kitchen window. I passed the spot where the copper pots used to hang the nails still visible on the bare wall. No sound except the faint groan of an upstairs vent. I moved quietly, my feet familiar with the soft groan of the third step. Upstairs in the bedroom, Brent and I once shared the drawers had been half emptied. His shirts were gone. Only one pair of cufflinks remained in the lacquered tray by the mirror, the ones he swore were too flashy for church. The top right drawer stuck slightly, as always. I leaned into the pressure and pulled it open. Still there. Nestled in a square of muslin cloth just as I'd wrapped it. My grandmother's necklace, 6 small garnets set in rose gold, the clasp still weak from where it had been repaired decades ago. I held it in my palm, not for sentiment this time, but clarity. Brent once told me it looked old world and heavy, and that he preferred simpler jewelry. So he hadn't noticed when I stopped wearing it. Or maybe he had, and chose to forget. Footsteps echoed from the foyer. Maris appeared in the doorway, her phone clutched in one hand, the other gripping the banister. You can't just take everything. She snapped, her tone sharp but uncertain. I folded the necklace into its cloth and slipped it into my bag. It was mine before any of this. Her face twitched. We were trying to honor Mom. It wasn't about you. I turned toward the window, then back to her. The next time I said evenly, Maybe speak to the people who are feeding you. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. She stepped back without realizing it. Downstairs, the refrigerator hummed behind a half-open pantry door. I walked past it and slid the binder off the hallway table where Brent had left it, unopened. I didn't slam the front door when I left, but I didn't close it gently either. The confirmation came by courier. A thick envelope with a tracking number and a tiny blue sticker marked Final. I signed for it in my robe, then carried it inside and laid it flat on the kitchen counter. The lake outside was still as glass. My teacup left a faint ring beside the envelope. Inside, transfer complete. My name removed. Property now held in escrow for closing. Disbursement scheduled. Timeline enforced. Brent had 21 days. I folded the paperwork neatly, slipped it into my folder beside the recipe journal, and pushed both aside. The phone rang 4 times that day. The caller ID flashed Brent's name, then Maris's, then Brent again. I let them ring. I turned the volume down. I boiled potatoes for hand pies and hummed while the dough chilled in the fridge. The next morning, I brought 2 boxes to the women's shelter near the edge of town. Inside were stacked linens, unused vases, a set of silver place card holders, and the bride robe Mary's had mailed to me last spring with a passive-aggressive thank you note. I wrote wedding extras. Please use freely on the top in black marker, and handed the boxes to a woman named Joan, who wore lavender lipstick, and thanked me twice. At the cabin that afternoon, the retirees arrived in pairs, 4 women each in their late 60s or early 70s, smelling faintly of citrus hand cream and wood smoke. I had posted the flyer on the local bulletin board a week prior. Simple bakes with small joys. Thursdays at 2 p.m. Tea included. They brought laughter. And stories. Ruth talked about her twin grandsons. Margot asked how much salt to put in the dough if you're cutting the sugar. I corrected her gently, then showed her the trick with the butter cubes. Why didn't you do this earlier? One asked, dabbing flour from her blouse. I wiped my hands on a towel, folded it over the counter rail. Because I thought I was already home, they didn't press. That night the fire crackled, and the scent of baked apples lingered in the rafters. I opened the window a few inches, let the lake air in, and didn't miss anything at all. The morning of the wedding, the lake was wrapped in fog. I sat with a pot of rosehip tea steeping beside a warm plate of peach scones, the kind Brent once claimed were too soft for his taste, though he ate 3 when no one was looking. My phone buzzed against the wooden table. A message from Sharon, an old friend of Brent's family, who had remained quietly loyal. 1 image, no caption. I opened it. Maris stood in front of a garlanded arch, clutching her bouquet with stiff fingers. Her dress hung unevenly at the waist, like it had been steamed in a rush. Connor smiled at her, but his eyes were tired. Behind them, the chairs were mismatched, the centerpieces flimsy. Someone had clearly tried, just not with heart. Another text followed. It wasn't the same without you. I didn't answer. I just closed the photo and placed the phone face down. That afternoon, I drove into town and met with a woman named Clarissa at a law office tucked behind a bakery. She had kind eyes and a firm handshake. The divorce paperwork was already prepared. Brent had finally stopped stalling once the eviction notice landed. He had signed. I signed too. No confrontation, no shouting, no tears, just ink on paper and the clicking of a notary's pen. On my way home, I stopped at the community bank and wired $5,000 to a literacy fund that provided after-school tutoring for under-resourced districts. I used Maris's full name for the donation and listed her work address for the receipt. That evening, I sealed the official thank you letter from the charity in an envelope with gold trim. I didn't include a note. No sarcasm, no jab. Just 1 line written above the printed receipt, a gift that lasts longer than a party. I mailed it the next morning. There was no need to wait for a reply. 6 months passed without spectacle. No grand declarations, no apologies left on my doorstep. Just space, time, silence, the kind that finally sounded like rest. I bought the cottage 2 towns over, closer to the water, tucked behind an old trailhead lined with wild pear trees. The previous owner had been a ceramicist who designed the kitchen for glaze work and baking. Thick countertops, a wide basin sink, sunlight that softened everything it touched. I painted the cabinets a pale green and replaced the hardware myself, 1 screw at a time. On the windowsill sat a shallow ceramic dish, hand-thrown, the edge slightly uneven. Inside it, my grandmother's necklace caught the morning light. I never wore it. Not anymore. It didn't have to prove anything. The hand pies had finished cooling before noon. I boxed them up, labeled each with care, and set the stack by the door for Saturday's market. Apple ginger, rhubarb vanilla, smoked mushroom, and thyme. Names I came up with while walking the lakeside path with Gus the golden retriever, who started showing up just after I moved in and decided I was worth staying for. He snored gently on the porch, now head resting on his outstretched paw, fur lifting with each breath. I'd made him a bed there, but he preferred the warm brick steps. I rinsed the last mixing bowl and wiped the counter twice more out of habit than need. Then I set the kettle on and reached for a book I'd already read 3 times. I didn't care. It opened in my lap like a familiar friend. Through the window, the lake shimmered. Ducks drifted past in quiet V formations. The only sound inside was the tick of the kitchen clock and the soft roll of boiling water. There were no voices rising behind me. No eyes narrowed in judgment. No calendars taped to the fridge with events I wasn't invited to. No one storming out of the room. No one smiling politely while cutting me out. Just shelves full of spice jars. A tray of fresh-baked bread cooling by the oven. And a life that finally fit. She wanted a wedding without me. And I built a life where I'm never invisible again.